Well, hello there and welcome to Travels with Geordie. If this is your first visit, my name is Peter Knowles and I live on that wooden motor cruiser here in Victoria, British Columbia, along with the memory of my pup Geordie, all the while coping with a bit of an engine problem. And for those of you who are regular viewers, let's cut straight to the chase, and I'm gonna go with option 4, a new engine. But for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let's jump back in time and figure out how it is we got to here. I bought the boat in 2015 with a Perkins 6-cylinder 354 in it that didn't run. Well, I knew it didn't run and I knew it had a hard time. In fact, the boat had spent much of the previous 5 years with a serious amount of water in the bilge. As a result, the engine sitting very, very low in the bilge meant the engine spent much of the previous 5 years partially underwater. I pulled the engine, replaced the oil pan, well, had a custom oil pan made at great expense, got it all back together, got the engine running, and well, wasn't long before the engine basically packed it in because of course you can't abuse an engine like that forever. Okay, so spent quite a bit of time trying to find a new engine and eventually did, a Perkins 4 236, and got that in, and it fit, but it really wasn't going to be any good because of some problems with most of the ancillaries. The base engine was probably okay, but heat exchanger, etc., all that stuff was shot on it. So I was still on a barge. So far I've spent over $10,000 trying to make this boat move, and well, I did get to take it cruising once. So then I bought another Perkins 4 236 recently, and I got it in, but it really doesn't fit. More on that in a bit. It's time to do this right. Over the course of this project, I've made mistakes. I've made a lot of mistakes. Most of those mistakes were brought on by financial or vulnerability stress. And well, I can think of very few things that bring on more financial and vulnerability stress than not having an engine in your boat. As a result, just about every decision I've made around the engine has been a mistake, an expensive mistake. As I said, over $10,000 so far. My boat still doesn't go. Now, I'm pretty good at fixing my mistakes. Replace a piece of wood, change the wiring, add another fastener, revarnish. Pretty straightforward. But the magnitude of this mistake would haunt me pretty much for the rest of the time I own the boat. The time I've spent crawling around in the bilge, running my fingers in the tiny crevices between the bottom of the engine and the bottom of the boat, it's just been a really demoralizing experience because I realize I have put such a commitment into putting this latest motor into the boat. I had decided that no matter what it took, I was going to do it. All that means is I'm digging my grave deeper and deeper. The truth is, the motor just does not fit in the boat. I would have to do such severe remedial structural repairs to make it happen. Future servicing is just a nightmare. The boat will be compromised forever. I have to bite the bullet now and do it right. And to be honest, the solution is very, very simple, very straightforward, and very effective. It's just expensive. And so you say, Peter, well, what engine? Beta Marine, 60 horsepower, 4-cylinder, naturally aspirated, completely mechanical, super simple, super reliable. I just love it. Better yet, the Canadian distributor is here in Victoria. Gartside Marine Engines is the Canadian distributor. So I called them up. I spoke to Ben Gartside. He said, come on in, let's have a talk. So I went in to see him. Ben, wonderful guy. We went over all the different configurations of the engine, transmission options. You can get extended feet, ratios, etc. It was really good. And on top of that, he likes the project and proposed that he's able to help with the purchase of the engine. And further to that even, I suggested, wouldn't it be fun to do a little 3-4 part documentary on the process of a repower, working with him and working with Beta Marine. Basically a kind of a sterilized version of the Travels with Geordie series, you know, no beer of the week, etc. And he liked that too. Let's have a quick rundown on how I see this project panning out, because there's a few steps. It has to be done in order.
So here's the little beauty. Beta Marine engines are marinized in England, but they're based on a Kubota base engine, which I think is absolutely splendid. I used to have a Kubota B21 loader backhoe, and I love the little diesel in it. Here's the engine that I think it's actually based on. Kubota is incredible. They make more small diesel engines than any company in the world. They seem to have hundreds and hundreds of them. Beta Marine was far and away my first choice. I just love these little engines. Being based on the Kubota, which is super, super reliable, and then marinized in England to a very, very high standard. The company is super interesting. They're largely a repower solution, and as a result, they're really, really sensitive and supportive to DIY and small operations. They tailor the entire process to be really, really easy, simple. And as I mentioned, I'm just so fortunate to have the Canadian distributor Ben Gartside here in Victoria, and his website is great too because I can drill right down to the specs that I'm looking for, which is, well, how big is it? These two numbers I'm most interested in, and they're very, very impressive. In fact, the engine's available with a shallow sump, which lines up with the transmission. It's just too easy. Do you think I could have drawn a reasonably straight line? Here's a longitudinal section or cutaway of where the engine's going to go, and you can see here above we have the underside of the sole, basically where you walk around in the wheelhouse, and at the bottom you can have the structure of the boat from the planking, the frames, and the floors. Well, for comparison, let's put the Perkins 4236 in. You can see it's pretty much sitting on the planking, cut right through all the structure and hard up against the bottom of the sole. Well, let's swap that out for the beautiful Beta Marine 60. Yes, ever so slight trimming will be required to the floors, but on the whole, it fits really, really well. Now, of course, for me, the size was a critical criteria in the engine selection, but most would say really it's the power that's most significant. Ooh, sorry, just had to have another quick look at its shininess. Okay, let's get down to here. The 60 horsepower Kubota is actually 56 horsepower at maximum speed. Now let's look at the actual nitty-gritty of what that looks like with the torque and power curves. Now, for those not familiar with engine power curves, this is a graph that plots engine RPM in the horizontal scale and torque, horsepower, and fuel consumption in the vertical scale. Let's have a closer look. Now, although the engine is rated at 56 horsepower, one doesn't expect to run it flat out while cruising. You want to pick that sweet spot for the ideal cruising speed. And for me, the sweet spot on an engine is peak torque, which we can see here at around 1800 RPM. So if we project 1800 RPM down to the horsepower curve, we see it ends up at around 43 horsepower. Let's see if that's enough. Oh, wait, let's project down to the bottom curve, which is fuel consumption, and at 1800 RPM, that 43 horsepower is only going to burn about 3 liters an hour. I love it. Okay then, so to determine the required horsepower for a given boat, you have to anticipate the intended speed you're going to be operating that boat. Now, for a displacement boat like MV Geordie, and in this case MV Zephyrus, which is slightly smaller, that's limited by something called hull speed. Hull speed is derived by a formula, which is the square root of the waterline length of the boat times a factor of 1.3. That factor of 1.3 to me is somewhat debatable. I think 1.3 represents a very slippery sailboat. In the case of a boat like MV Zephyrus or MV Geordie, I think it might be closer to 1.1. Every boat has a sweet spot, the speed at which you can really tell it's at its most efficient. Very, very little wake. Here's MV Zephyrus steaming along at just over 6 knots, creating almost no wake, by far the most efficient speed. Regular viewers may recall that I've recently done a sea trial with MV Zephyrus calculating speed versus RPM, effectively speed versus horsepower curves for MV Zephyrus, and at that sweet spot of just around 6 knots, MV Zephyrus requires about 36 horsepower to push her through the water. If I extrapolate that up to the slightly longer MV Geordie, that comes to 39 horsepower, right on the money for the 43 horsepower available at peak torque of the Beta Marine 60. There are going to be those who wonder why I don't take advantage of this opportunity to consider going electric or hybrid electric, and I did a whole section on that which I'll share with you in an upcoming episode, but it doesn't really fit here. Spoiler alert, it's cost.
What are the next steps? First thing, of course, is to get this poor engine back out of here and sold. That may sound daunting, but this moving engines around is beginning to be old hat. And then I'm going to completely empty the wheelhouse, which means getting rid of and disassembling my mock-ups for the dinette, as well as over here, I'm trying not to fall in the hole here, the mock-ups for my galley, which have pretty much outlived their value. With the wheelhouse completely empty, I'm going to completely rebuild the sole, which is the floor in the wheelhouse, because it's in bad shape and it's not really appropriate for the new design. While I'm doing that, I'm going to completely gut the rest of the bilge, which means largely the fuel tanks. I want them gone. I don't trust them. I don't want to have anything to do with them. I'll be putting new fuel tanks in. Now, as we all know, there's some major structural flaws in the bilge, and the neat thing about this new motor is that now I can rebuild the structure of the bilge to its original condition, as well as beefing it up as I've proposed in previous structural videos. Now, the sequence of doing that is a bit complicated, because to be able to do some of that work, I need to be on the hard, and to get from here to the yard where I get hauled is a 5-hour steam, meaning I need an engine. So I will be temporarily installing the new Beta Marine engine on new engine beds, which will sit outside the existing engine beds, steam up to the haul out, swing the engine aside, really not much of a deal, break out all that concrete that's in the bilge, which is just so disgusting and annoying, rebuild the structure of the bilge, including new floors, new frames, and reset the new engine beds, replace the engine, and move on. It's a lot of work, but it's really, really the right way to go. Well, as exciting as all that sounds, there's no doubt this is a very expensive proposition. The engine with transmission and various associated gear is going to be getting into the $20,000 Canadian range. And well, that's a tremendous amount of money for me. Now, the neat thing about it, with the support I'll be getting from Ben Gartside, what I should be able to recover from the diesel engine I just bought and can sell again, and cash that I've been saving, I can cover about half of that. The other half, I'm terrified to say, I'm going to consider crowdfunding. I can certainly say I'm very, very uncomfortable about this, but I like to think of it as possibly micro crowdfunding. Well over 10,000 people will watch this episode, and let's say at $1 per view, we'd be home free and get this engine next week. Now, that's not the way crowdfunding works, I know, and I may be way too over optimistic about this, and it just may not work out, and I understand that. I'm going to buy this engine. I'm going to make it happen one way or another. I'll figure a way. It just may take a lot longer. And to that end, I have taken the probably audacious step of opening a GoFundMe account. Yes, and there's a link to it down below in the description. If you enjoy the show and you want to be part of the great repower, the last great repower, I'd be very, very grateful. And if not, please don't even consider it as being anything that I have an expectation of. There, I did it. These last few weeks have actually been terrifically difficult, and regardless of the outcome of the big ask that I just made, I must say I'm feeling so much better about the boat in general. I know it's the right thing, and if it takes time, it takes time. Well then, hello there, and welcome to the Travels with Geordie Beer of the Week. Back in the wheelhouse, which is a bit precarious over the abyss of a hole down into the bilge. Let's get straight to the beer. We're going back to my neighborhood brewery, Moon Underwater, and yet another edgy name. It is the Dimebag Sour IPA, and the reference there is to a blues musician, Dimebag. Okay, let's see what we think. I generally don't like sour IPAs, but I just have to try it. Let's see here. What a crazy couple of weeks this has been. As you may be able to imagine, some anxiety for sure. Let's see, put a little head on that. All right, Dimebag Sour IPA from Moon Underwater. Edgy, whoa. Sour, but not just bitter. That's really quite good. I like it a lot. Okay, excellent. all the better to cheers. Some winners. Well, last week's t-shirt winner is Eric Van Hoeven. Congratulations, Eric, and I'll get in touch with you and we'll make sure that you get a Travels with Geordie t-shirt. I'd also like to thank Chris Bartram. He's a winner from a couple of weeks back who opted out of receiving his prize in favor of donating it back to the show. Again, thanks so much, Chris. So cheers to both of you. That's actually okay. And from the Amazon wish list, just really impressed. Thank you so much. A whole schwack of push buttons. I'll just put a couple of these down. Some more of the push buttons that will be the push buttons used on the outdoor helm upstairs, being weatherproof. And a bunch more of the indoor push buttons that I really like with that nice click action on them. So now I'm pretty much set for those. I'll be able to start the engine when I get an engine. Anyway, they all came from Paul and Jan Rials. I hope I pronounced that correctly. Thank you ever so much, Paul and Jan. And, well, you do now need a word of the week. And the word of the week for me this week has got to be exciting. I am really excited. It's a big transition, it's a big step, and gosh knows how it'll go. But one way or another, this boat is going to have the engine that's appropriate for it. And I'm very excited about that. So if you'd like to win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt, use the word excited or exciting or something like that in a comment down below, and I'll pick at random from the first week or so of comments. And if I pick you, you'll win a Travels with Geordie t-shirt. See you next week. I'm excited.